So we are still in this sermon series based on the 12 steps. We're continuing the work that we need to do so we can navigate life in this world that's not as it was meant to be. You need to realize that there is the world that God created, the structure that God put into place in the first couple of chapters of Genesis. And when humanity decided that they didn't want to go with God's order, the way God had designed, the way God had planned, everything changed. And the world we live in today is not the one that God planned, that God designed. It's not the one that God has intended. And so we have to figure out, how do we live in it? How do we exist in this world? And that's what the 12 steps can help us do. That's why we're talking about it. So far, in these steps, we've admitted that we are powerless and cannot fix ourselves, that we need a power from outside of ourselves to make that happen. That power that's from outside is a power that's greater than us and can come and help to restore sanity and balance to our lives. We have decided to, in popular phrases, let go and let God. To turn our wills over to God and let God do what God is going to do in our lives. And that leads us to step 4. And as I've said, every week these steps build on each other and they seem to get harder every week. This one's no different. Step 4 tells us that we must make a searching and fearless inventory of ourselves. A searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. These words, searching and fearless, right at the start, let us know that this is not going to be easy. If you were to go look up these two words, the definitions aren't fun for what we're talking about. Searching means to thoroughly scrutinize, to leave no stone unturned, to go into the deepest and darkest places of who we are that we don't like to see, that we don't like to spend time in. There's also a connection, a connotation of searching being disconcerting, of it being uncomfortable. The searching makes us unsettled. Fearless means we push past walls and excuses and facades that we have built around ourselves and our actions and really look at who we are and why we do what we do. It's fearless because we might see something terrifying without our safeguards in place, without our excuses to hide out in. This step honestly reminds me of a line from a movie that I saw so many times as a kid. Has anybody ever seen The Never-Ending Story? Okay. Usually when I ask about movies, like, no, we have no clue. We're on Never-Ending Story. Right on. I always wanted to ride the luck dragon. And that was actually my first traumatic moment as a child when his horse died. That's everybody's traumatic moment as a child my age. But the whole point of the Never-Ending Story is essentially it is a story about a young man learning, discovering who he is. It's about somebody figuring it out. What they're meant to do, who they're meant to be, how they're meant to engage in life. And the story is told two parts through a young guy reading a book. And in the book, there is a hero trying to save the land. And that hero is discovering the same thing. He's on the same journey. Who is he? And on this journey, the hero has to face 3 tests, 3 gates. And there's one gate in particular that this step makes me think of. This particular gate is called the magic mirror gate. And when they explain the magic mirror gate, here's what they say. Everyone thinks they know what the mirror will show, but kind people find out they're cruel. Brave men discover that they are really cowards. Confronted by their true selves, most people run away screaming. Today we have to look into ourselves like that magic mirror gate. We have to be willing to see what's there. To see past who we pretend we are. To see past facades that we have put up in place. To reveal who we actually are. We do this because we need to find out, we need to reveal, we need to figure out where is the work that needs to be done? Where are the places that we need to ask God to step into? What are the things that are broken and beat up? What are the things that we've been trying to hide and keep away from God? Now, a good place to look for help with this step is the book of Proverbs. This is a book that I would argue is criminally overlooked by theologians because it doesn't really have anything to do with the great events or people of Israelite history. Most of your theologians and biblical scholars like to spend time with those books where we're talking about the Exodus, or Or we're talking about the many things that God has done, or the history of the people, how they got from here to there, or the different kingdoms. And they just don't spend a lot of time focused on Proverbs. Proverbs are usually 1 to 2 verse wisdom sayings that honestly really aren't groundbreaking. Who's read Proverbs? I would argue most of the time when we read Proverbs, we're like, oh, I already knew that. But isn't it funny how the things that we know have power when we're reminded of them? Just because we know it doesn't mean we actually know it. And that's where the power behind the Proverbs lie. It's taking these common sense things that we think we all know and just throwing it out there in front of our face. Look, here it is. This lack of great historical things that causes Proverbs to be overlooked by biblical scholars is actually a mistake. They are in the wrong mindset. They're missing out. The book of Proverbs actually is grounded in the most important event in the history of the Israelites, actually the history of anything, creation. Proverbs is grounded in creation. All the wisdom sayings are tied around the idea that the order of creation mirrors the social order and how it's put together and how it exists. And that to learn to live within that order is both wisdom and righteousness. Basically, Proverbs teaches that wisdom was woven in with creation. Creation is not something separate. There is wisdom, there is order tied into that creation. And to live in sanity and balance with each other and ourselves is to do so with the created world around us as well. That's an important part that gets overlooked. In these wisdom sayings, there are many different kinds, but the time we're going to look at today comes from a parent speaking to their child. So the idea is that this wisdom is formative. It's meant to be foundational, that all other aspects of life should be built on. We're going to look at Proverbs 4, 23 through 27 this morning. Keep your heart with all vigilance, and from it flows the spring of life. Put away your crooked speech, and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward, and let your gaze be straight before you. Keep straight the path of your feet, and all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. This scripture begins with talking about the heart and the importance of guarding it. Now remember, in this culture, the heart was not about love. It was not about romance. It was not about those warm, fuzzy feelings that we get when we look at our significant others. Instead, the heart is the core of your being. It is the seat of intellect. It is the place that defined who you were and how you saw the world, how you interacted with the world, what gave the definition or the reason behind your actions and motivations. And this culture that these proverbs are written to, the heart dictated everything you did. And so it's important that we start with that. That is where this searching and fearless moral inventory must take place. The seat of our being, the core of who we are, the reason for why we do what we do. And the scripture goes from guarding the heart to then talking about keeping your eyes locked on the right thing and keeping your feet straight and not deviating one way or the other. This is all introspective language. This is all about what we're doing as we're looking at the heart. This is about how we honestly are keeping the heart pure, how we keep it safe, how we keep the core of our being in the right place. This is how we know where we may have strayed and gone wrong. This proverb is about continuously keeping watch on what we let in. What goes into that core? What goes into that reason for why we do and who we are? How that affects us and how it directs the choices that we make in life. This idea of always watching the feet and not swerving means that we're always looking for the places that we shouldn't be. The brokenness, the wounded places within ourselves so that we can address them. This idea of continuously doing it means it's not a one-time work. It's a continuous and constant thing that we do daily. That's where it gets hard. I mean, it's hard initially to look honestly inside yourself to see who you are, but to do it every day. to address things every day, to make sure we're moving in the right direction, in the right place every day. But that's how we know what to give over to God. That's how we know where things aren't right. That's how we know where that brokenness is. That's how we know where God's working in our lives. That's how we know God is, when those places start to feel better, when we start to feel healing, when we start being able to overcome them and face them honestly. This is how we accomplish the fourth step, to looking into that core of our being, to consistently be watching what we let there, to consistently be asking God, God, step in, do the work. Here's the brokenness. Here's what's off. I don't know what to do with it, but you do. And that's precisely why this step is uncomfortable and why we need courage to face it. When we really dig into our core being without all the barriers and excuses, we're going to have to confront all kinds of trauma and harm. Things that we have pushed down, pushed away, buried under layers of whatever to keep it away from the light. We have to dig into it and pull it out. This is where we move past barriers and excuse. And I want to share with you, excuse might be the greatest impediment to this fourth step of looking inside of ourselves. We have thousands of excuses that we use to justify why we do the things we do. We have thousands of excuses that we use to justify how we feel, the actions that we take, the ways that we treat other people. Anybody ever sat and just thought about all the excuses? All the reasons you give yourself why it's okay to do what you're going to do? There are so many places in Scripture where it says, this is what it means to be the people of God. And I have noticed, though, in all my years in the church, while we know what all those lists say about being the people of God, we seem to have all these excuses that make it okay to not do those things. We know that we are meant to love everyone. We know that we are meant to pray for them, to lift them up, to do what we can to help them be the best person they can be. But we also have a list of excuses why we don't have to do it for everyone. That make it okay to not do that. That even make it okay to do the opposite. Excuses are the greatest barrier to this fourth step. Some of these excuses we have will be related to the things that have been done to us. And we came up with the excuses because we didn't respond in the right way. There will be things that we have pushed down away deep inside that we think aren't affecting us, but they really are. But we don't get to it because we have the excuse for why it's okay to do what we've done. Some of these excuses we come up with are so we don't have to face what we've done to ourselves in response to trauma and harm. Those things that we've done will be wrapped in shame and regret, and so we come up with excuses to not feel that. We all have them. I do. You do. But we have to push past those. We have to go ahead and admit that our excuses are not good enough. That our excuses are causing harm. That our excuses are stopping us not only from becoming who God made us to be, but from doing what God intends for us to do. I firmly believe, as Scripture says, that each one of us has something that God intends for us to do. Our excuses will stop us from getting there. Our excuses that we put up as walls and barriers to our core selves, to who God really made us to be, to go and do this work, are stopping us from getting it done. Remember, these Proverbs are a book of wisdom built on the idea that we're meant to live in a created order, in a created world. This particular proverb is the advice of a parent to a child about how to get by in life, how to handle the brokenness of a world that was not meant to be. That means essentially this is not a suggestion. This is not an if you feel like it, or if you want to, or if it works with how you see the world around you. This is an imperative. If you want to live in the world as God made you, to do the things that God made you to do, to be healthy, to be whole, to move in the world and share God with others, you have to do these things. This fourth step has the potential to make us not like ourselves or be ashamed of ourselves. As we really look at the core of who we are, as we really look at the things that we've done, as we've really looked at the things and actions we've taken, this fourth step has the potential to make us feel shame, to make us feel horrible and guilty. I know as I spend time reflecting on my life and some of the things I've done, I felt that guilt. Anybody ever spent time reflecting, looking at what you've done in the past? And it's like, I still feel guilty about that. You know, the thing that I still feel the most guilty about, that I carry with me, even though it happened so long ago, even though my mom and I talked about it, even though forgiveness was offered, there was a time where I got grounded until I could pass math. Now, I have a math disability. We didn't know that at the time. I really can't do it. You can ask Judah. I have Judah do simple addition for me. If it's not on the calculator, I can't make it happen. And I could not pass the math class. And so I'd been grounded, and my mom was hardcore. I'd been grounded for a year and a half. All 4 quarters and through the summer too. And one time I was just so beat up and I was so anxious and so mad, I called my mother a name I should not have. I cussed her. And I could see when I called her this, what it did to her. I could see the look in her eye. And you can see that I'm breaking up a little bit about it now. I still carry the guilt and the shame. When I look inside to see how I've responded in life, there are plenty of these times where I have guilt and shame about what I've done, how I've responded. If I really look past the excuse that I give myself, which is, well, I was grounded for a year and a half, and really look at what was beyond that excuse. If I really get to that place, I feel that guilt and that shame. But I want to share with you, I want to implore with you, we don't need to live in that place. For as much as I'm sharing with you, I still carry some of that guilt. It's not what it was. It is one of the places that I have asked God consistently, God, please come. Work on this guilt and this brokenness that I still carry with me. We don't have to live in that place of being ashamed, of facing ourselves and what we may find. We are digging these things up with purpose. We are moving past facades and barriers and excuses with a reason to become better. To become better people than we were when we started the process. To become the people that God made us to be. To know where we begin this journey of recovery. We dig these things up so that as we approach God, we know what we need to bring up. We know the places that we can specifically go to God and say, God, I need help here. We can put all the pieces before God of our mess, our hurt, the shame and the aches and the woes. We can say, God, here it all is. Every bit of it. Help me. And if we do this, if we step into this fourth step, I believe 100% that God in some way that will really only make sense to us, answer our plea of help me, with now the work begins. As Lauren comes up to lead us in song, this song of response, I want to encourage you, this is your time with God. This is your time to respond to how God may be speaking to you. If you need to use this time to say these things to God, God, here's my mess, help me. You don't have to stand up and sing. You can just talk to God about that. Do what God leads you to do. If it's to stand and sing, stand and sing. If it's to spend time with God, giving Him your mess, give Him your mess. As God leads you, follow. Let's stand, all who are able.